If you're running finance in a startup or scale up and you're not sure whether to upgrade your systems or just fix your processes, then this will help. In today's video, I'm going to go through the tech stack that I recommend for each area of the finance function. But at the end, I'm also going to go through the tech stack that I recommend at each stage of growth. So from very early stage right through to Series B, and give specific tech stack recommendations for each one. So then hopefully you can make the right decision from where your business actually is. Hi, my name's Alysha Randall. I'm a fractional CFO and I also train new and aspiring CFOs in startups or scale ups. And I wrote a book on this topic as well. So if that sounds interesting to you, then please click on the subscribe button below. So I do one of these tech stack recommendations every 6 months. So it's been, I think it was September, October last year that I did one of these, just because the software changes quite rapidly. And so it's worthwhile me doing it every 6 months. So I just wanted to highlight firstly that tools don't fix broken processes. And I have experienced this firsthand where we've come into a company and they have put in a tool thinking it's going to solve everything. And because their processes were broken, the tool actually just made the processes more broken faster. So with the right tech stack at the right stage, it helps you scale better, but it's not going to fix broken processes. So before you start implementing a new piece of kit, you want to review the workflows first and try to identify any inefficiencies. So that will definitely be going through each step with all of your team and also the team outside the finance function. You want to review this full end-to-end process, and then you want to consider how quickly your startup or scale up is growing. So you want to make sure that any new processes or new tools can handle the business if it's 3 times bigger than what it is today. So it's definitely worthwhile taking the time to do this first. I know it's really easy to just jump on a piece of software and implement it really quickly because you're just tired of a process that's not working. But I can tell you from lots of experience that taking the time to do this planning first and fixing broken processes first is going to save you an amazing amount of time later on. So please don't forget this piece of work and don't skip this step. Okay, so the first one is just this core accounting software. So very early stage and seed level, I would definitely recommend Xero. If you're on QuickBooks, that's fine, but my preference is Xero. Then once you start getting a bit bigger, Xero is also still pretty good as long as you optimize it and clean it up. So sometimes, particularly if we come into businesses when they're coming up to a Series A, the Xero is quite messy. There's a lot of the chart of accounts are all over the place. It's not very consistent and it's really difficult to understand what's going on. So sometimes it's worthwhile doing like an internal audit or just a bit of housekeeping and cleaning everything up. And you might be surprised that Xero will work for you quite a while. However, particularly if you're working with inventory or goods, Odoo is a very nice piece of kit. We have been using it with one of our clients for 4 months now. They have product, and so it manages the inventory. It's an ERP, but it's in the cloud, and it's been around for a while, but I've only really heard of it in the last 12 months. So definitely check that out if you need to upgrade slightly from Xero, but don't want to spend the type of prices that say NetSuite are charging. And then Light Ink is another one that has been talked about quite a bit in the startup CFO circles. I personally haven't used Light Ink, but it's certainly one that I'm keeping an eye on. I have heard great things, and so this is why I'm including that one here. And then once your post Series B plus and any of those things start heaving, then you might want to consider a more expensive piece of kit. And this is NetSuite, Sage Intacct, those kind of products. But they do come with a price tag and also an implementation time. It's 6 to 12 months to implement NetSuite properly. I know I've done it twice. It's not a small project and it's also an expensive piece of kit. So I would say that if you can keep on the more nimble and newer softwares as long as possible, the better. There is a bit of grumblings around NetSuite not being as good as it once was. So I just wanted to caveat that. I personally haven't experienced it, but Odoo and Lite seem to be getting a lot of traction in the startup community. The next one is accounts payable. So this one hasn't changed too much from what I have presented before. I've just added a couple in there. Dex is, does as it says on the tin, it automates incoming invoices, approval max slots into that quite nicely with purchase orders and approving spend. I'm using these two with many of my clients. Moss is also quite good if you use the entire thing. So if you don't have Dex, don't have Approval Max, don't have virtual cards for expenses, then you might want to consider Moss because it does all of those things in the one package. If you've already got Dex and Approval Max, unless you're willing to migrate onto a new one, then I might want to give this a miss. But Moss is quite good because it's got everything. Payhawk's also quite good. I'm using that with a couple of my clients, particularly with multi-entity and scaling. So you might find that one to be quite interesting. Ramp for the US is also global. And then FX, you may want to consider Wallets as well. There's a few FX things out there, but Wallets is one that I've seen a few times. Then we go on to payroll. So in the UK, this one has changed to Deal. This is the one that we quite like at the moment. We were using BrightPay as well. I used to always recommend that one, but their prices have increased quite considerably. So that's why Deal is now the new favorite. With USA, I use Gusto, although I think Deal is also in the US, but Gusto I've worked with quite a few times in the US and it works quite nicely. Virtual cards instead of expenses, that is my recommendation. And then the three would be Spendesk, Pleo, and Moss. Just caveating Moss again, it's only good if you're using everything just because it's much more expensive than its competitors if you're only using one of their services. But if you're using all of them, then it's quite nice. I think that's quite good if you have people that are having to log in, and that means they only have to log in to Moss. They're not having to log into all of these different things, which is quite nice. In the US, we use Brex for cards, and then for HR, HiBob is the one that we use the most often. Obviously, there are lots of different HR options, like there is with everything, but HiBob is the one that I would recommend for a startup. Accounts receivable. So with credit control, Chase is quite good. It doesn't have all the bells and whistles, but it's quite straightforward to set up and it's quite inexpensive. I'm sure this one is going to be replaced if they don't upgrade soon. So I just wanted to caveat that one. ChargeBee for SaaS billing, we're still using that one. Stripe also does subscription billings as well. So I think if you have multiple ways of charging and your subscriptions isn't huge, then Stripe can work quite well, as can Go Cardless. So Go Cardless is UK specific, I believe. I only use it in the UK. I don't use it in any other jurisdictions, but that is subscriptions for direct debits. So if you have recurring invoices or subscriptions, then Go Cardless is another way of doing it. Otherwise, you can use Stripe and ChargeBee, as I mentioned. And then I have to caveat this one because they are one of my clients, but if you have e-com payment platform, then Super Payments is another one to look at if you're in the UK. They have probably the most inexpensive option as far as credit payments, open banking, and cards. So if you have an e-com business that you're managing and you're trying to reduce your merchant fees, then have a look at Super Payments. but yes, they're one of my clients. They're not paying me to do this. It's just I know their product. So the next one is cash and treasury. So float is very basic. We have tested that one out. It's if you have a really small company and a founder that really wants to dig into things, then float's quite easy to set up. We, however, use Excel, but it has to be properly structured. It's not overly, it can easily go wrong and you can overcomplicate it. But if you can use the tools that you have at your disposal, then it works fine. Excel or Google Sheets, obviously. AgiCap is much more advanced. It's EU based. It is obviously much more expensive, but you know, there is a point where you do need to move away from Excel and float. So AgiCap might be one that you want to check out. I did touch on FX before, but there's a few more. Wise is another one. Airwallex, as I mentioned. Mercury I actually use for my business. Mercury, you just log on to their portal, choose what currency you want to purchase, and then transfer it. It's quite easy. They have quite good rates. And then Revolut is another one. So reporting and budgeting, this one's changed quite a bit since the last update that I did. Focusing on just consolidation and reporting, Fathom I still recommend. So I am still using Fathom with most of my clients, but not all. And that is since the introduction of Sift. Now, Sift is, if you haven't seen, it's an add-on to Xero. So if you are a higher level subscriber, then you will get access to Sift. Or if your Xero is hosted by a Xero partner, so for us, for example, Fast Growth Consulting, I registered as a partner only a couple of months ago, so our clients could access Sift for free. Now, the reason why I like Sift, apart from the cost saving for clients, is that if you are a product-based business, you can do more reporting around your SKUs. So in Fathom, it's very high level. So for a services business, it works perfectly well. But for product-based business where you want to see product profitability, Fathom can't do that. Well, not yet anyway, whereas Sift can. So that is why we have moved our product-based clients away from Fathom and on to Sift. So if you're product-based, you may want to consider Sift. Now, with budgeting, I incorrectly said 6 months ago, 12 months ago, that I am waiting for a budgeting tool to be launched that is flexible enough and user-friendly enough and inexpensive enough so that I can use it with early stage startups and scale-ups. Now, this is no longer relevant because it's looking like we will still use Excel, but we will be using it alongside AI agents and tools. Now, I'm at the very early stage of learning, so I'm learning all about Claude and Cowork and Copilot and all those fun things. I haven't implemented any of them yet, so it's worth caveating that. The company I work for recently completed a Series B, and they used the model that I built in Excel. So I did that all from scratch. I still did it the manual way. I did actually use ChatGPT because there was something a bit of an odd thing about this particular business model, and I wanted to present it in the most simplest way possible. And so I did a bit of brainstorming with ChatGPT and came up with a good method, but then I still built it in Excel. I have heard that venture capitalists prefer Excel to Google Sheets, largely because they chuck an Excel file at their analysts and the analysts go through it in a lot of detail and play around with it. So I would recommend using Excel instead of Google Sheets if you are building a growth model. And it was a very successful Series B. It closed really quickly. We exceeded how much we wanted to raise. So right now, today in March 2026, having an Excel model is perfectly fine. But from a finance person, thinking about how you integrate your AI agents and tools within that is something worth looking into. There has just been a lot of buzz around co-work and Claude, and so I've attended workshops just to learn more about it. But Copilot is very similar. They kind of all do the same things. It's just getting an understanding of how these tools can help you. So that's all very exciting, and potentially in the future, this presentation will be really quick because it'll just be how am I using my AI agents to do everything rather than telling you what finance tech stack I have. Then we've got data and BI. So it's a new slide. I haven't added this one before, but thought it's probably worthwhile including this one. Looker Studio is what I use with a lot of my clients. It's very good for early stage, works as part of your Google workspace. And so this one I think works quite well. And so as long as you have someone in the tech team who can manage the data, then this one works quite well. There is a bridging tool that I've learned about quite recently called Coefficient, and this helps you pull live data into sheets, essentially a bridging tool. So you can look at that as something to use while you still don't have much of a budget, or a BI team for that matter, or someone who's really good at managing data. So Coefficient might be one to check out if you're at that earlier stage. And then once you're bigger, Power BI is great for scale-ups. Then we move on to equity and other. So for UK parent entities, I'd recommend Ledgy or Carta. I'm using both of those actually with our clients. If you have a US parent entity, then I would recommend Carta. Ledgy is much more European. So if you actually have a European continent parent entity, then Ledgy is great as well. I think it's a Swiss company actually. It's not a UK company, and Carter is a US entity. So they obviously started with the US, but they've made huge strides in the UK relatively recently, such as HMRC and Companies House linking. So that's really interesting. But with continental European, I would recommend Ledgy. We need to change that slide. Okay, so artificial intelligence, the ones that I am actually using rather than learning about is the ones listed here. So ChatGPT, I'm using Zapier. They have a really nice AI edition that makes it more than just linking one piece of software to the other piece of software, which is what I used Zapier for before. It's very good at linking software workflows, but now they have an AI edition where it can change things that are moving from one piece of software to the other. So that's very interesting. Make is also around workflow automation. So that's also interesting. Perplexity, I also continue to use as well. So they're the ones that I'm using at the moment. Early experimentation is Rillet, and that's around an ERP as well. And as I mentioned in the budgeting section, the AI-led tools and agents. So that is again looking at things like Copilot, Claude, Co-work, all those different fun things. I can't say hand on heart that I'm using this to do this particular workflow yet, but I just wanted to highlight I'm definitely looking at these, and certainly when I do my next 6 monthly update, this will be a bit less of a this is what I'm experimenting with and more this is what I'm using, hopefully. So that is artificial intelligence. Time management, so it depends on how you want to manage your tasks. So if you have a lot of tasks or projects that need micromanagement, then ClickUp might be something that you can consider. We've used this with a client just because they had it with tech, which is generally how you find time management tools, and they decided to implement it across the group. As I said, it is very task and project heavy, as tech is, and sometimes finance isn't. But when we had to really focus and get through a lot of stuff, it was actually quite useful. If you wanted, say, a Trello board and you wanted to test that out, I would recommend trying Kanban flow first, just because it's a similar concept to Trello. It's just a free option, so you can test that out probably for a couple of months, I would say. And if you find it really useful and want to upgrade, then Trello would be the upgrade. As far as SOPs and policies and where to find things, Notion really works well for me. We like to link to Google Sheets to find things, and all of our SOPs and policies are in Notion. And then as part of the SOPs, it links to Google, to whether it's Google Sheets or Google Doc or whatever it is. I would just find that way of organizing it a bit easier. And then timesheets, whether you're fractional and you want to have that in-house or you work for an agency, then both Harvest or Toggle would be my recommendation. Again, at the startup or scale up phase. In my fast growth consulting, I use Toggle with the team, and that's good enough for us. But I know one of our clients who is an agency, they use Harvest. So I'm familiar with both. Okay, so this is where I wanted to go through the recommendations for each of the different stage. So at very early stage, pre-seed, so we're talking up to about 500,000 in revenue, that's GBP. Your goal really is to survive and stay lean. So you're probably in this type of business as a fractional or a finance manager potentially. And so a typical tech stack would be your Xero and Dext, probably Wise or Revolut for some FX. Forecasting would definitely be in Excel. Stripe you might use for taking payments, and you might use the basic payroll in Xero, for example. And your focus is just keeping everything really clean, tracking your revenue properly, managing your cash runway, and just keeping a real close eye on cash. And of course, you're not going to have an ERP at this stage. The next stage is, my head is blocking it, is your seed stage. So this is about 500,000 in GBP revenue up to about 3 million. So that would be up to say 4 million US. So a typical stack would be an optimized Xero. So really probably buying a more expensive version and making sure that it's really working for you. Approval max, because you have a bigger team, you'll need people to approve all the payments, not relying on the founder all the time. You may or may not use something like Float to manage your cash flows. You might just have it in Excel as well. Stripe and Chargebee if you're got subscription payments and you want to be a bit more sophisticated. And then Fathom or Mosaic, depending on your budget, but I would definitely use Fathom for reporting for sure. Sometimes at the seed stage, you do need to have a bit more sophisticated reporting than just stuff in Excel. So I would definitely recommend Fathom. All of our seed stage clients are using Fathom and the board loves it, and so do potential investors. So definitely use that. And then payroll automation. So you might want to take it out of Xero and put into something like Deal or Gusto or whatever region you're in, just because the Xero payroll doesn't give a huge amount of information. It's hard to sometimes get the visibility. So by moving that into something that potentially links with your HR system is really important. And then potentially even your cap table, even though you probably wouldn't have a cap table just yet, you probably do a cap table at the next level. So you really want to be clear on your revenue definitions. You want to be very clear on your spend control. So you definitely would have some expense control, and you would also have a rolling forecast to really keep an eye on cash flows. Definitely avoid ERP at this stage. You might, unless you have a lot of inventory and you need to consider something like Odoo or Light to help with inventory management. Then we get to Series A, so about 3 to 10 million pound revenue. Here, your goals are really efficiency, scalability, and investor confidence. So a typical stack would be you can definitely still be on Xero. We're working with a couple of Series A. We're still on Xero. Or you might want to move to Odoo or Light. Again, it just depends on how operationally heavy you are. Definitely want spend control, things such as Payhawk, revenue automation tools, as we mentioned. And then you may want to introduce more around the BI dashboards. So it's keeping track on all of your metrics and your KPIs. So you may want to be more sophisticated on the business intelligence side of things. So things like burn multiple, revenue per head, payback period, reliable reporting, they're all things that you really need to keep an eye on. This is when some of the original things that were put in early days of the company, they might start creaking or they might start getting a bit slow and not working for you as well. So it is a good time to start looking at upgrading within reason. And finance team also becomes a lot more strategic at this stage. There should definitely be a fractional CFO, if not a head of finance in-house at this stage. And then finally, we've got Series B plus. So obviously you can go crazy. But the goal here is really infrastructure that supports the scale. So a typical stack, you may still be on something like Xero or Odoo or Lite. Again, it depends on your business model and also how many regions you're in. So if you're only in, say, the holding company region and one other, you might be fine with Xero and Fathom. But if you're in multiple regions and have lots of different inventory and lots of different SKUs, then potentially upgrading to an ERP earlier rather than later is much more important. Advanced FP&A, so you would consider getting out of Excel and onto one of the tools, particularly if you have the budget for it. A business intelligence layer such as Power BI may also be interesting to you. And then treasury sophistication. So this may be something like buying your FX in bulk at the beginning of the month rather than just spot rate whenever you need to. And just being a bit more clever on things like FX, on looking at the terms, looking at cash, looking at debt, looking at all the different things. So it's definitely need to be much more sophisticated than just having a 13-week cash flow in Excel, for example. So your focus is growing that EBITDA, whether it's getting to EBITDA black or profitability and then growing that. Definitely looking at productivity metrics because not only are you growing revenue, but you also need to make sure that you're doing it as efficiently as possible. Multi-entity consolidation, as I mentioned, if you just have one or two regions, it's a bit more simple. But if you have multiple regions, then you do need to be a bit more sophisticated on the tools that you're using. And at this stage is probably when you also need to be ready for audit. So one of my clients, as I mentioned, we're just about to close a Series B. This is the first year when we finish in December 2026. That is the first year that we're going to be audited. So we are very aware that we are preparing for audit readiness in 2026 because we will be audited in 12 months' time. So that is very common. Most Series B raises, even if you haven't hit the thresholds, particularly because they've been increased, your Series B fundraise as part of the shareholder agreement will probably be an audit. So it's unusual for you to get away from an audit from Series B. I would say you want to avoid staying in startup tools for too long. You want to use them until they become cumbersome, inefficient, or just too manual and taking up too much of your time. You want to avoid manual revenue recognition. You absolutely want that to be audited. And then Excel only board packs. If you haven't already upgraded to something like Fathom or one of the tools that comes with your ERP, now is definitely the time to do it. A Series B board does not want to be getting board packs in Excel. So ideally you've upgraded it earlier. We actually upgrade at seed round. But if you haven't, then 100% do it at this level. Okay, so that is the finance tech stack that I recommend at both the different areas, but also the different stages in a life cycle of a startup or scale up. If you want to become a confident and strategic finance leader, then this is my 3-step plan. First one is to subscribe to this YouTube channel. I do a video every single Thursday, and so you can see that upload when that comes through. The second one is to check out my book, Financial Leadership Fundamentals, How to Become a CFO in a Startup or Scale Up. It's very, very practical and it gives you actions at the end of every single chapter that you can implement immediately. And the final one is to join the FLF course, where we go through all of this stuff in much more detail, but we also have Q&A sessions with myself twice monthly. So if that sounds interesting to you, then check out the links below. Otherwise, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next week. Cheers.